Welcome back, climbers. I'm your co-host, Kaylee Floyd, and this is another episode of Climbing Mount CMMC. Today, Bobby is joined by the last guest of Season 1 of Climbing Mount CMMC, Joe Scholefield. Joe is the Director of Compliance at DefCert and has over 20 years of cybersecurity and IT experience. Bobby and Joe are going to be talking about the questions you should ask when hiring a CMMC consultant or an MSP during your CMMC journey. We're so excited for you guys to join us in today's episode, and we hope that you enjoy.
Well, I got to connect with Joe through where, Joe? How did we connect? Why don't you share?
The Cyber AB CCP training that we both
yeah
took together. Yeah.
So we went through the CCP training. The test had not yet come out, right? So we were basically taking a course for a test that did not yet exist. I think that's kind of set the tone for CMMC in my experience. Just everything kind of backwards, but it's been a great ride. So, Joe, thank you so much for joining us again. Like I said, today we're going to be covering some pretty cool topics, but I just wanted to give you an opportunity for those people who aren't familiar with DefCert and, what you do there. Can you maybe talk a little bit about that before we go into our topic?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm the Director of Compliance at DefCert. We're a small or boutique cybersecurity consulting firm. So what we do is we try to help organizations, small, medium, large, doesn't matter what size you are, but we try to help you understand where you're at in terms of compliance and, work with you to try to meet these, cybersecurity compliance objectives.
So today what we're wanting to talk about for those that are joining us is that we're wanting to provide guidance for people who might be hiring a consultant, somebody like DefCert, for example, or an MSP like what I do. And I thought this would be just a great topic. So let me just start off with, kind of a hard but straightforward question. When you're trying to hire somebody from just a consulting perspective, not an MSP, but just from a consulting, what are some things that you think that they should look for and ask from someone like that they would hire that would be doing those?
Yeah, I think the number one thing that I would look for in terms of a cybersecurity compliance consultant is what their overall approach is. Are they trying to snake oil sell me a CMMC in a box kind of solution where it's, a one click, you're automatically compliant by doing minimal effort on your part? Because at the end of the day, there's a lot of work involved in these things to make sure that we're doing it right. Organizations can take either an enclave approach or a whole organization approach. Those are both totally valid approaches here. But at the end of the day, unless you're going to be tied to a consultant to manage this for the rest of your organization's life through this process, ultimately you're going to want to try to take this stuff over for yourself and know how to manage it yourself and understand the requirements yourself and know what they mean to you.
Because you're not at the finish line when you get your cert, right?
You're only just restarting a clock. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. One of the things that I guess you would want to see in someone that's going to be doing those types of consulting engagements is that they've built into their system the client eventually taking over that yes. service, and then they kind of move it forward, right? Unless you just want to have a perpetual engagement.
Right. And that's a totally valid approach that some organizations might want to take. What we try to do ourselves is try to teach you how to fish and allow you to learn how to manage these activities and manage your own documentation, your policies, your SSP, all that fun stuff yourself, so that you wouldn't necessarily be tied to us for eternity.
So you really kind of touched on a good part there. Is you said those types of documents and things that they would have, you would expect them to bring that to the table, at least in some type of maturity for that client to kind of take it forward. How do you see people handling that?
Yeah, so I know there's different maturity levels of different organizations, where some organizations may have nothing, no established or properly, approved policies or standards or any sort of documentation like that. Other organizations, they might have, ISO 9000 certifications that they have to do. So they have at least some set expectation or some set amount of documentation, even though it might not necessarily meet the bar for what you need for all of your NIST 800-171 or CMMC specifics. So what we like to try to do is just take in what it is that you do have and try to mine that for credit, wherever we can get it. and figure out which assessment objectives are met, which ones are not met, and from there work with organizations to coach them into what words they might need to add in order to gain compliance credit where they can.
And I think I'll ask a more pointed question here, Joe, and I know mileage varies quite a bit, but would it be fair to say that even if you hired a great consulting company that has a tremendous amount of experience, it's going to tie up an employee significant amount of time, right? That they can't just say, hey, Sid, you're going to take care of this. You'll just talk with these guys. It'll be easy. There's not really a whole lot for you to do. They've got it all. Is that even realistic? I mean, Sid's going to be tied up for a considerable amount of time? If so, how much, and what does that look like?
Right. Yeah. I mean, that is one of the when it comes to, how quickly can we be compliant sort of conversations, that is ultimately how it ends up turning. It's not necessarily the amount of time that I'm able to, as a consultant, commit to you as a client. It's how much time you can commit to me to make sure that you're producing, that you're showing me the documentation, or producing, what we call audit proofs or evidence of your implementations, or on the technical front, if there are changes that are identified that are necessary to your system to become compliant. I'm not going to help you with that as a consultant. I'm here to coach you, to review, to help assess your implementation. It's going to be you or the MSP that's involved that is necessary to actually make change happen within that organization.
So it's a lot has to deal with that. I think sometimes people go into this engagement thinking, well, it's your job. It's our job. Like, we all have to kind of get through it together. And there's going to be a significant investment, even with a top quality consultant that's going to be able to guide you. Let's say they're not even doing the technical implementation of those per se. They're just helping you with the consulting aspect of it. Even then, it's going to take a good amount of time from that person to have that engagement, right?
Yeah, and especially if it is an organization that was only able to assign one person, chances are, at least my own experience here, that person's going to be in IT. And it's not just an IT problem. Right. We have people, processes, and technology that are involved throughout the organization. We talked about background checks earlier. Where's your HR person? We need their time as well. Or, your assigned IT person will need to know and to talk to HR to, understand organizationally how we meet these requirements.
Well, and I think if you kind of look at the other side of the coin, that's what you would expect that the consulting company, it's almost like if you're looking for an investment and they're like guaranteed return on this, you're like, whoa, that's super scary. If they're like saying, oh, you don't have to spend much, we got you, like, you need to be scared, I think, of an organization that's saying that, because that's just not realistic. If you want to have it done at any given time, because they'll certainly take your money and string you along for a long period of time, like you were saying, and nothing's really going to get done other than the good feeling that something is being done, even though not really much. Now let's turn the gears a little bit. So you're a consulting organization, and you are now consulting for the company, and you're providing no technical implementation moving forward, right? So you guys aren't doing the patching,
right? But
that company has an MSP.
Yes.
What are questions that you would want to say, hey guys, I know that you got an MSP. Here's the things that I would want them to know and be a part of. Can you kind of shed some light on that?
Yeah, and it's a very common problem where there is more than one entity involved. Many of our clients do outsource a lot of the IT responsibility to an MSP. So one of the things that I would myself want to understand, at least as a starting point for that kind of understanding or engagement, is, Bobby, let's use you as an example. What activities are you responsible for on behalf of our shared client? Do you have a customer responsibility matrix or something similar to that says, yes, we are responsible for vulnerability management, and we're responsible for creating accounts in Active Directory or Entra ID, but we're not responsible for saying who's authorized. The client, our shared client, needs to be responsible for that. And so that, to me, is kind of the first pass, is understanding what the MSP is accepting responsibility of. And then from there, we can understand, what gaps need to be filled, what that shared client would themselves then have to be responsible for.
One of the big hot button topics is tools, right? Can you kind of talk us through how they can be dangerous in helping or hindering the compliance journey on that?
Yeah, I mean, assuming that you mean, or at least the tool that comes to my mind in particular would be an RMM tool, a remote management
Yeah, sure.
tool. So, very commonly used by many MSPs, as it helps them manage multiple clients. We're both in the game of supporting and servicing multiple clients at the same time. So, that RMM tool no doubt has a lot of capabilities that can support a client's needs for CMMC, like maybe instrumenting and managing patches. But understanding how that tool is itself managed and built, and how it operates, what permissions it has or uses. Is it a cloud-based system, or is it on-premise? Hosted by yourself.
Mm-hmm.
There's lots of questions to ask about that to understand not only the
For
MSP
sure.
tool base, but what the client themselves is using.
Yeah, it's a pretty big deal, and it definitely got even harder once they started talking about adding restrictions on the type of data that isn't even really CUI, right? They call that security protection data, and that type of data would be like SIM or SIEM, however you want to say that,
right.
Data or RMM collected information.
Right.
If they're putting that information, if the MSP they're using is putting in the cloud, that's probably not going to go well for your assessment if it isn't FedRAMPed, because the auditor is going to be looking for that type of assurance that wherever that data is going is going to meet it.
They very well might. We're taking a little bit of a cautious approach there, where we might not necessarily, if those tools were FedRAMP, don't get me wrong, that would of course be bread and butter. That would be the best possible solution for that. But the other consideration would be, is that MSP at least pursuing CMMC themselves? Because as a part of that CMMC rule, where that definition of security protection data does come out, it's in that context of, if you do store, process, or transmit security protection data on behalf of, as an external service provider, that they themselves would then need a CMMC certificate at the same level as the organization. So, a good question for MSPs is, how much are they preparing themselves for this?
Absolutely. Yeah. One of the things that I also suggest is, if you're talking with an MSP, is ask who. I would find this out before you say yes to them. Or if they've already doing your work and you're like, are you going to help us? And they're like, yes, then you would want to say, show me the list of the tools you utilize and what its purpose is. And then where is that data saved?
Yeah.
You want to know where it's going. Are they, and the way that the rule came out, it forced us to save a good chunk of what we're doing in our, like what you're saying, Joe, in our FedRAMP environment that we have, that we host for us. Like, we're not FedRAMP because we're in a FedRAMP environment. So when we go to get assessed as an MSP, that environment's going to be checked. It's going to get its level 2 certification, even though it's in a GCC high, FedRAMP environment. That doesn't mean it's FedRAMP. That means it just, I have some things I can inherit, right?
Right, exactly.
So don't let the MSP kind of say, oh, I put my stuff in GCC high, it's all great. You're like, well, not necessarily the case. Because they, like you said, the MSP has got to be willing to get level 2 certified if you are going to get level 2. Right. And that comes down to the question is, what kind of assurances, Joe, would you feel comfortable from that MSP? Like, what would you ask? Like, what would you ask them to say to make you feel comfortable that they're going to do it?
I mean, I suppose at the end of the day, it'd be a lot of that same questions that we'd ask any other organization that we were consulting with. Show us your maturity, show us your policies, procedures, things like that, and prove to us that you are living and breathing CMMC yourselves.
Because right now, no one can show a level 2 certification yet. I mean, you could say I went through a joint surveillance assessment, which would definitely be a big, that's a very, good indication, obviously, because you're supposed to get grandfathered in, I think is how the rule was supposed to go. But other than that, that's it. So I love that idea, Joe. So let's fast forward and say everything's great. All systems go. how would your consultant or MSP advocate in your behalf or help you in your behalf of when you're searching for that organization that's going to do the assessment of your organization? How does that look? What are some things that you would expect them to help you with?
So in CMMC today, or as far as we know in the future as well, the client would be able to choose which assessor they choose to work with. So I do think it's important to make sure that when you are choosing your assessor, that you're finding an organization to do your assessment that understands your way of business. That they don't necessarily take a hard line of a physical VPN appliance must be on every employee's house or something like that, to provide connectivity to the system. There's a lot of feeder questions that you could use when evaluating a C3PAO. I want to say the Small Business Working Group at the National Defense ISAC recently published a white paper that helps with some of those questions that you could use. So that's a great resource to understand what those questions are. But right, an MSP is an important relationship there as well. So, does the MSP expect to sit side by side with you during that assessment and answer questions live with you, or even if not, physically on site there, virtually able to support that assessment? Are they able to provide evidence and artifacts ahead of the assessment? We've found a lot of value in gathering this evidence in preparation for an assessment, so that when you do walk into that assessment, you're not having to answer every question live. You just show them your homework that you have already put together. And you're now controlling that narrative, saying to the assessor, here is my answer to the test. Not just the again, all of those screenshots from your tools and things like that. And so, when working with an MSP, are they willing to and able to provide that evidence up front?
I think probably another huge undervalued and underestimated point of a very experienced consulting company would be a good understanding of the ecosystem of where you could go to get a good C3PO organization to do your assessment, right? The company that you would hire to help you with your consulting should absolutely know off the top of their head 4 or 5 solid C3PO organizations that are going to do just like what you're talking about, Joe, that are going to be able to make sure that they don't get caught in the weeds and don't help your client go off the rails, because that's what they're doing on a regular basis, right? So they're going to know what that is. And if if you're going through the assessment yourself, this might be or probably would be your first time ever. So, but that consulting company might have happened to work with 10, 15, 20 other people already earlier that year or last year and know the lay of the land. And that is a huge deal, right? The wrong assessor versus the right assessor could make all the difference.
Yeah, absolutely. And no doubt as time goes on, we're going to see and hear, a lot more examples of that. But another consideration to take there as well is behind a lot of these C3PAOs is going to be a shared pool of CCAs, or those lead assessors, because there are only so many of them right now. And so, a lot of those lead assessors may not be hired only to a specific C3PAO. They might be shared among others.
Very true.
And so, just understanding at that layer, will you know who your lead assessor is walking into this?
Yeah, you'd want to have that discussion pretty early. And I think also you would want your consulting company to kind of know what type of evidence and types of pieces of data you would be able to expect, and how that would go, because you don't want to be in a lurch in those types of situations.
Right.
Well, Joe, thank you so much for joining us today. Is there anything else that you'd like for us, you think that we need to cover before we close it out?
No, I think the only closing thought that I might have is just, when it comes to consulting, it's just solid communication overall. A good consultant is an organization that is going to work with you and understand your processes, your procedures, and try to, help you be compliant without changing who you are. To me, that's one of the greatest strengths that you could have as or what you might want to look for when it comes to a consultant.
Yeah, that's such a good point, because it doesn't do you any good if you're CMMC level 2, but you can't operate as an organization. Right. That's just not very realistic. And I think that's a bit of a stark contrast, because right now, predominantly most of the organizations that have gone through those types of assessments are C3PA organizations, right? They went through and got certified themselves so they could do the assessments. But usually, and most of the time, what they built was just a kind of play environment to show they knew what they were doing. As the starter pistol goes off, organizations are going to have to function and live in this environment that they're building. Yeah. And that is going to be something totally different. Right. And having an organization that's consulted, that understands that keep them functioning and compliant. Boy, that's something right there. Good point. I like that. Well, Joe, thank you so much for joining us today. And for you guys, like I said, this should be probably the last episode of the season. And if I'm correct there, then thank you for joining us for this full season. We've got some pretty cool ones lined up already for next season. So stay tuned. And thank you so much for joining us, and keep on climbing.
Make sure to follow us on LinkedIn and YouTube to stay up to date on the latest CMMC news. We hope you guys enjoyed today's episode, and listen out for the next one. But until then, keep on climbing.